He loved her most when she was just beyond reach. Not when she offered affection, not when she yielded, but when she turned away in silence. Something in that distance pulled him toward the very thing he swore he didn't need. Power, control, validation. Yet beneath it all, a deeper truth waited. He didn't want her. He wanted what her withdrawal awakened inside him. When she became untouchable, the mirror cracked. The illusion of dominance, his posture of composure, his logic, his restraint, fractured under the quiet weight of her indifference. He didn't understand why the calmness of her detachment burned more than her anger ever could. Anger he could fight. Silence he could not. Her stillness became the reflection of everything he repressed, the longing for approval, the terror of rejection, the unspoken need to be seen. He called it pride, but it was fear. What he hides when she becomes untouchable is not hatred, it's exposure. The masculine ego, conditioned to define worth through conquest, collapses when faced with a woman who cannot be conquered. The moment she stops reacting, the game ends. And without the game, his identity has nowhere to stand. For so long, his power was measured in her emotional response. When that supply disappears, he meets the void that has been there all along. The void is not her absence. It is his disconnection from his own soul. In Jungian terms, this is the animus meeting the anima, the inner masculine confronting the inner feminine. What he projected onto her as beauty, mystery, or danger was never hers alone. She was the carrier of his lost emotional world, the mirror of what he exiled. When she retreats, the projection falls, and what returns to him is unbearable truth. Everything he idealized in her was his own unlived depth. Everything he despised was his denied shadow. He thought he was losing her. In reality, he was meeting himself. The shadow appears when the mask of control fails. It emerges in quiet panic, subtle defensiveness, the desperate attempt to rationalize why she pulled away. He'll say she's cold, manipulative, or detached. Yet beneath the accusation lies envy. Envy of her self-containment. Envy of her ability to remain whole without external validation. Envy of her capacity to exist in emotional stillness while he trembles behind the armor of certainty. To the unconscious mind, silence feels like annihilation. The absence of response triggers the same panic as abandonment. The male psyche, conditioned by centuries of externalized purpose, interprets her stillness as rejection of his essence. But the deeper layer reveals something more painful. It is not her silence that wounds him, but the memory of every silence he endured and never faced. The mother who turned away, the father who withheld approval, the inner child who learned that love must be earned. He hides this fear beneath composure, behind logic, behind the appearance of control. But the archetype of control always carries its opposite. The ruler is haunted by helplessness. The pursuer is bound by rejection. What he cannot control begins to control him. And so he projects. He projects the wound of inadequacy onto the woman who stopped engaging. He tells himself she's testing him, punishing him, or trying to manipulate his emotions. But the projection only masks the truth. He is the one playing the game of power. He is the one terrified of being small, unseen, replaceable. Her silence only exposes what his pride tried to bury. This is the unconscious at work. What is not integrated becomes externalized. He cannot face his own vulnerability, so he chases it outside himself. He seeks a woman to confirm his worth because he has never met the part of him that already knows it. Until he does, every relationship becomes a mirror, every withdrawal, a spiritual test disguised as rejection. And what of her, the untouchable woman? She too is caught in the archetypal tension. Her detachment is not always strength, it can also be armor. Sometimes her silence is not peace but protection. She has learned that distance is safer than dependency, that mystery is safer than vulnerability. Yet when she stands in that stillness long enough, it transforms. What once was defense becomes discernment. What once was avoidance becomes sovereignty. He cannot follow her there, not until he dissolves the illusion of dominance that once defined him, because sovereignty cannot meet control, only presence can. When he finally stops trying to interpret her silence and begins to feel it, the transformation begins. It's not a lesson she teaches him, but a mirror she holds. Through her distance, he meets his own disconnection. Through her calm, he sees the chaos within. Through her untouchability, he recognizes the false power he built to protect the boy who once felt unseen. That recognition is the beginning of death, the death of the egoic masculine, the one who confuses authority with avoidance, confidence with suppress, desire with dependency. And from that death, something quieter emerges, awareness. The awareness that power is not possession, that love is not validation, that distance is not punishment, it is reflection. The paradox reveals itself. The more he tries to reach her, the further he moves from himself. But when he turns inward, when he stops running from the discomfort her silence evokes, he finds her not outside but within, the anima waiting to be integrated. The woman he chased was never hers alone. She was the image of his own unlived wholeness. And in that moment the chase ends. The noise fades. There is only the stillness that once frightened him, now transformed into peace. Stillness has a way of unraveling false strength. It doesn't destroy it through force but through absence. In that quiet, every illusion that depended on reaction begins to collapse. He feels it like a slow erosion beneath the skin, a loss of gravity where certainty once stood. For the first time, he is not the center of someone's orbit. He is suspended in a space that does not mirror him back, and it terrifies him. The masculine ego is built upon movement, direction, conquest, control. Stillness disarms it. Without pursuit, he cannot prove his worth. Without her emotional reflection, he cannot locate himself. It is not her detachment that wounds him. It is the exposure of his dependency on being needed. The untouchable woman becomes the archetypal mirror of his unfinished individuation. Her silence confronts the part of him still defined by external validation. Every time he reached for her attention, he was not seeking love. He was seeking reflection. Attention was proof of existence. Desire was proof of power. But when she withdrew, those proofs dissolved. He meets the raw core beneath his roles, the unguarded self that doesn't know who he is without control. That is where the real shadow lives. The shadow does not appear as darkness. It appears as defensiveness, as rationalizations, as the quiet contempt he feels for her distance. He convinces himself he's beyond caring, that he's over it. But beneath the mask lies a current of humiliation, the ancient wound of the rejected child. He tells himself she's the problem because he cannot yet see that her withdrawal is only the trigger, not the cause. In that wound lives his unintegrated anima, the inner feminine that feels, that receives, that surrenders. He has rejected her softness as weakness. He has feared her depth as chaos. So the psyche, in its perfect symmetry, manifests her outside him as a woman who embodies everything he cannot face within himself. The moment she becomes untouchable, he meets the emotional distance he created long before she arrived. Jung called this the process of projection withdrawal. When a projection collapses, the energy it carried must return to its source. That return is never gentle. It tears through the ego's defenses, demanding integration. The man who has lived through external validation must now feel what he avoided, the emptiness beneath performance. He cannot seduce his way through this one. He cannot argue, charm, or reason with silence. He must feel. That is the task. Her distance is not rejection. It is initiation. It calls him to see beyond the polarity of dominance and submission, beyond the old dance of control and surrender. It calls him into awareness, where love is no longer a battlefield but a mirror. But he resists this call because awareness demands vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens his identity. He is torn between two worlds, the collapsing illusion of control and the emerging reality of self-awareness. The ego trembles between them. In one, he remains the pursuer, measuring worth through victory. In the other, he dissolves into something unmeasured, undefined, painfully human. This is where many men retreat. They return to pursuit because pursuit is familiar. They find new reflections, new women to project their unlived parts onto. Each relationship becomes a repetition of the same archetypal loop: desire, control, disappointment. The cycle continues until the pain of repetition exceeds the fear of self-confrontation. When that moment arrives, awareness cracks open. He sees that her untouchability was never personal, it was archetypal. The psyche uses relationship to awaken what solitude cannot. Every withdrawal, every silence, every unmet need is a summons back to the self. He begins to understand that the external world only mirrors the internal state of integration. This recognition does not soothe him, it humbles him. To see clearly is to lose the luxury of blame. He can no longer call her cold when he knows it is his avoidance that freezes intimacy. He can no longer call her distant when he feels the miles of unexpressed emotion within his own chest. The harsh truth is simple: he was never abandoned, he was disconnected. In this realization, the polarity begins to shift. The outer feminine he wants wide to possess becomes the inner feminine he must protect, listen to, and reclaim. His growth is no longer defined by control, but by capacity to feel, to hold, to stay. This is where masculine maturity begins, when power becomes presence. And yet, awareness does not come cleanly. Each insight burns away another layer of false identity. He oscillates between recognition and regression, between clarity and defense. The psyche dismantles him piece by piece until what remains is not the man who wanted to win, but the man willing to see. She feels this shift even without words. Something in his energy softens. The pursuit ends not because he gave up, but because he woke up. He no longer seeks her validation, he seeks truth. He no longer fears her silence, he listens to it. Her detachment no longer defines his worth, it reveals it. In that space, polarity transforms. No longer the game of opposites, it becomes the dance of awareness. The untouchable woman is no longer a threat to his ego, but a mirror to his evolution. And for the first time, he understands that what he once called rejection was the beginning of awakening. Awakening rarely arrives as light. It begins as disorientation. When the familiar scaffolding of identity collapses, the psyche drifts through an inner wasteland where nothing can yet take root. He feels it as restlessness, as fatigue that has no name. The urge to fix, to chase, to explain. These impulses fade, leaving only a hollow kind of quiet. What he doesn't yet see is that this emptiness is sacred. It is the field between old power and true presence. The masculine that has lived by control does not surrender easily. It dies in fragments, first through confusion, then through grief, then through humility. Each fragment reveals what control was protecting. Beneath the hardness lies sorrow. Beneath the silence, shame. Beneath the anger, longing. These are not flaws, they are thresholds. Every emotion he repressed to maintain superiority now rises as a wave demanding recognition. He feels betrayed by his own sensitivity, but the betrayal is the healing. The anima within him, long silenced, begins to speak. She does not arrive as comfort but as ache. She reminds him of every moment he numbed instead of felt, every truth he reasoned away. She asks for no explanation, only attention. To feel her is to remember that feeling itself was never weakness. It was the doorway back to wholeness. This is the deeper secret he hides when she becomes untouchable. It is not that he fears losing her. It is that he fears feeling himself. Her distance removes the distraction of pursuit, forcing him to face the raw terrain of his own emotional body. It is easier to chase a woman than to meet the pain of isolation. Easier to control the outer world than to surrender to the inner one. But the unconscious demands balance. What is not integrated turns destructive. The repressed feminine becomes the manipulative lover, the cold mother, the untouchable muse. She appears again and again, wearing different faces, until he sees that the pattern is not about her at all. It is about the exile within him. When he finally listens, something subtle shifts. The voice inside no longer sounds like hers. It sounds like his own, soft, patient, almost ancient. The psyche begins its slow work of reconciliation. The masculine learns to protect without dominating, to lead without suppressing, to desire without consuming. He begins to understand that power without compassion is fragility disguised as strength. And she, the untouchable woman, feels the echo of this evolution. Her distance softens into discernment. Her silence no longer punishes, it clarifies. She recognizes that her boundaries are not walls but mirrors. In holding her sovereignty, she awakens his integration. But she cannot do his work for him. She can only embody what he has not yet reclaimed. The dynamic between them becomes less about control and more about consciousness. Every interaction becomes an invitation to awareness. His old defenses, sarcasm, detachment, withdrawal, lose their charge. They were designed to protect an identity that no longer exists. What replaces them is a kind of still strength, quiet but unyielding. He no longer needs to dominate to feel safe. He simply remains. This is the masculine redefined. Not the conqueror, not the savior, but the witness. The one who can stay present in the face of discomfort without collapsing or escaping. The one who can feel his own pain without projecting it outward. The one who no longer confuses possession with intimacy. In Jungian language, this is individuation, the long process of becoming whole. It is not about perfection but integration. The opposites within him, control and surrender, logic and emotion, dominance and vulnerability, cease to compete. They begin to converse. What was once repressed becomes resource. What was once shadow becomes ally. He learns that love is not something to win, but something to recognize. It exists not in the exchange of validation, but in the meeting of awareness. He begins to sense that the woman he once chased was never separate from the psyche's call to evolve. Her silence was initiation disguised as rejection. Her distance was not punishment but permission, to grow, to feel, to remember. The paradox completes itself. The more he accepts her autonomy, the more he feels his own. The more he honors her silence, the more he finds his voice. The more he stops trying to possess her, the closer he moves to intimacy. Because true connection does not come from merging, it comes from meeting. And in that meeting, something ancient resolves. The archetypal war between the masculine and feminine ends, not through victory but through awareness. He no longer needs her to complete him, and she no longer needs to protect herself from him. They exist as mirrors, not opposites. The psyche breathes. Yet awareness, once awakened, asks for embodiment. It is not enough to understand. He must live it. Every reaction becomes a test of presence. Every silence a reminder to stay. The journey is no longer about her, it is about integrity. To love without losing self. To hold without controlling. To see without projecting. He stands where once he would have chased. There is no drama left, only depth. No possession, only perception. The same silence that once exposed him now sustains him. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. Liberation at first feels unnatural. The psyche, long addicted to tension, mistakes peace for emptiness. He notices how the mind searches for friction, how it wants to provoke, interpret, or rescue something just to feel alive again. But there is nothing left to fix. Awareness dismantled the old scaffolding of meaning. What remains is space, vast, unsettling, and alive. In that space, he begins to sense the difference between control and consciousness. Control contracts, consciousness expands. Control demands response. Consciousness allows silence. The ego trembles at this realization because its power has always depended on friction. When he no longer resists, the entire machinery of psychological defense loses purpose. What takes its place is not passivity but presence. Presence feels like standing unarmored in the middle of life's rawness. It does not seek to avoid emotion, it allows it to move through. This is the integration Jung spoke of. Not escape from opposites, but the holding of them. The masculine learns to contain what he once rejected, the unpredictable flow of the feminine within. The feminine learns to trust what she once feared, the stillness of the masculine that does not demand but witnesses. When she becomes untouchable now, it no longer wounds him. It reveals her sovereignty and through it his own. He sees that her distance is not about him, it is her truth. The ego's reflex to interpret everything as personal dissolves. The archetype of the king begins to replace the wounded boy. The king does not chase approval, he guards awareness. His authority is inner alignment, not outer control. Yet this transformation does not happen in one revelation. It unfolds in cycles, each demanding deeper honesty. He meets remnants of old patterns, moments where pride returns, where fear whispers, where the need for validation reawakens. But he no longer believes these voices. He observes them as echoes of a self that no longer rules him. Awareness does not silence the ego, it transcends it. He remembers how easily he once confused reaction with power, how quickly he sought control when uncertainty arose, how silence once felt like humiliation. Now, he sees the paradox. What once triggered his collapse is what now grounds his strength. The very absence that once exposed him has become the field in which his consciousness rests. The psyche works through opposites. Only through losing control could he understand freedom. Only through facing rejection could he discover self-acceptance. Only through the shadow could he approach the light without distortion. The archetypal dance has always been this: union born from separation, awareness born from pain. And she, her presence, her silence, her distance, was never his enemy. She was the guide disguised as loss. The untouchable woman represents the sacred feminine unowned by the masculine ego. She exists not to soothe him, but to awaken him. In her stillness, she holds the mirror through which he meets the part of himself capable of depth. When he stops demanding her closeness, he finally meets his own. The longing that once attached to her becomes intimacy with the self. The tenderness he once reserved for her becomes compassion for the forgotten parts of his psyche. He no longer seeks to merge with her, but to understand the polarity that binds them: presence and flow, direction and feeling, consciousness and life. The animus and anima begin to integrate. What once existed as projection now lives as internal dialogue. He can sense within himself both the part that acts and the part that receives, the part that knows and the part that feels. He realizes he was never meant to choose one side. He was meant to unite them. When consciousness expands this way, the dynamics of love transform. Intimacy is no longer fueled by dependency but by resonance. He can stand beside her without trying to define her. She can open without fear of losing herself. Connection becomes sacred because it is chosen, not needed. The unconscious no longer governs the story, awareness does. What was once compulsion becomes creation. He does not love to escape himself anymore. He loves as an expression of wholeness. That difference changes everything. Still, the psyche demands humility. Awareness does not erase shadow, it teaches coexistence. The untouchable woman remains a reminder. Whenever his ego swells, her distance returns in another form, reminding him that consciousness without humility becomes illusion again. She is the threshold keeper, ensuring that awakening never becomes arrogance. And so he learns to thank the silence, to revere what once unsettled him, to see love not as emotional transaction but as psychological alchemy. Through her distance, he integrated his depth. Through his awareness, she reclaimed her freedom. The polarity that once tore them apart now binds them in a higher symmetry, not dominance and submission, but reflection and respect. They no longer orbit around fear. They stand within awareness itself. He no longer fears what he cannot possess. She no longer hides what she cannot control. Between them there is no chase, no collapse, only clarity. Clarity carries a different weight than certainty. Certainty insists, defends, and concludes. Clarity observes. It allows what is true to reveal itself in its own rhythm. He begins to understand that consciousness does not control life, it harmonizes with it. The masculine principle within him, once rigid and commanding, now learns to move in quiet alignment. He speaks less, listens more. Every silence, once unbearable, now feels like an unseen language between the seen and unseen parts of himself. He walks through days with the awareness that his old patterns are still present but no longer powerful. They flicker like ghosts, seeking reaction, testing whether the old identity will rise again. Sometimes it does. He still reaches for control, still feels the impulse to prove, still flinches at rejection. But now, awareness interrupts the reflex. He pauses. Breath replaces reaction. The pause itself becomes an act of mastery. This is the new power, awareness without possession. He realizes that maturity is not the absence of desire, but the capacity to hold desire without becoming it. He can want her without needing her. He can love her without seeking to define her. He can witness his longing without mistaking it for lack. The unconscious no longer drives him. It informs him. When she appears again, whether the same woman or another, the energy between them feels different. He no longer enters as a pursuer. He arrives as presence. The polarity remains, but the tension has evolved. The dance is no longer fueled by projection, but by recognition. Each sees in the other the archetype they have already met within themselves. He sees the feminine as mystery, not threat. She feels the masculine as grounding, not dominance. Together, they represent the reunion of opposites that Jung called the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage within the psyche. It is not about romance. It is about wholeness. Through this union, life regains its depth. Emotion and reason, spirit and body, action and reflection. These are no longer opposites to be tamed, but forces to be balanced. In this space, love feels less like passion and more like truth. It is not an emotion to chase, but a presence to sustain. It moves slowly, deliberately, without spectacle. It does not burn out because it no longer feeds on illusion. It lives on awareness itself. And yet, even in this clarity, shadows linger. Awareness does not eliminate them. It simply prevents possession. The old fears of abandonment, insignificance, or rejection still whisper, but they no longer dictate behavior. He recognizes them as visitors, not rulers. Each whisper becomes another invitation to stay awake. He begins to see how all relationships serve this purpose. Every attraction, every heartbreak, every silence was never random. The psyche uses the language of relationship to bring unconscious material into view. The people we meet are mirrors. Some show us our beauty, others our wounds, and some, like the untouchable woman, show us our entire unfinished evolution. What she awakened in him was not longing for her body or mind, but for his own missing wholeness. The more he chased her, the further he moved from himself. The more he blamed her, the deeper he buried his truth. Now he understands that her distance was never cruelty, it was grace. See, grace wearing the face of rejection, grace disguised as silence, grace forcing him back into the only union that ever truly mattered, the inner one. The woman herself is free now. In becoming untouchable, she transcended the narrative of needing to be chosen. Her silence was her own initiation, into discernment, into sovereignty, into the feminine that no longer performs for love. Through her detachment, she reclaimed her inner masculine, the one that protects her boundaries, holds her integrity, and stands in truth without fear of loss. In that reflection, their psyches meet as equals. No savior, no victim, no chase. Just two beings aware of the divine tension that keeps polarity alive without distortion. Love, stripped of its unconscious games, becomes reverence. He no longer hides behind the myth of the strong man untouched by emotion. He knows now that strength without tenderness is only repression. His power lies in his openness, his capacity to hold contradiction without collapsing. The shadow that once haunted him becomes companion, a reminder of his humanity. And in this balance, life feels different. Work, connection, solitude, everything slows into meaning. The need to prove fades, the need to feel deepens. His gaze, once searching outward for affirmation, now rests inward with curiosity. Awareness has replaced hunger. When she is near, he no longer fears losing himself. When she is far, he no longer feels abandoned. Presence remains constant, unbroken by distance. This is what it means to be whole, to carry connection even in separation, to remain aware even in silence. The archetype completes its cycle. What began as projection ends as embodiment. What began as fear ends as understanding. What began as reaction ends as awareness. He no longer hides the dark secret. He understands it. The secret was never that he feared her detachment. It was that he feared his own depth. And now he no longer runs from it. Depth becomes his resting place. What once felt like drowning now feels like home. The same silence that used to slice into his pride now rests beside him like an old companion. He no longer measures love in intensity, reaction, or pursuit. He measures it in awareness, how deeply he can see without needing to control, how fully he can stay without needing to fix. He moves through the world differently. Every interaction reveals energy beneath words. Every emotion becomes information rather than threat. He can sense projection as it arises, both his and others, and he does not fight it. He allows it to unfold, to show what wants to be integrated. The masculine within him has become transparent, a vessel through which awareness flows, not an armor that blocks it. He sees now how his journey through her silence was never about romantic triumph. It was initiation into authenticity. Her distance stripped him of illusion until only essence remained. When there was nothing left to chase, he met the self that no longer needed chasing. That was the true union, the merging of consciousness with its own forgotten depth. The psyche always moves toward wholeness, even through pain. What looks like loss is the psyche correcting imbalance. What feels like rejection is the unconscious restoring truth. The untouchable woman was the necessary polarity to break the ego's false symmetry. She was not punishment but medicine, a reflection so precise that it burned away delusion. He remembers the boy who believed that love must be earned through perfection, that power required dominance, that emotion meant weakness. He does not reject that boy. He holds him now with the tenderness he once sought from others. This is how the masculine heals, not through denial but through reunion. He brings every exiled part home. In this integration, the feminine within him, the anima, no longer hides in fantasy or projection. She lives quietly in his perception, guiding intuition, softening response, deepening empathy. Her presence gives his actions gravity and grace. The inner dialogue between animus and anima becomes the foundation of his outer relationships. He no longer seeks completion in another because he carries it within. And she, wherever she is, feels it. The energetic chase that once bound them dissolves. If they meet again, it will not be through unfinished need but through conscious resonance. Their connection will not replay the old cycle of dominance and withdrawal. It will simply exist, clear and spacious, without the noise of ego. He now understands what Jung meant when he said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. He has been transformed. What began as a struggle for control became an education in surrender. What began as obsession became reverence. What began as silence became understanding. The dark secret he once hid is no longer dark. It is simply human, the truth that every man must face when the illusion of mastery collapses. The truth that beneath pride lies fear, and beneath fear lies longing, and beneath longing lies the soul's hunger to become whole. Awareness turns this wound into wisdom. He does not need her forgiveness, nor does he seek closure. Closure belongs to stories. Awareness belongs to life. The narrative between them has dissolved into something quieter than resolution, a field of mutual recognition, even if unspoken. She walks her path, he walks his, and consciousness continues its work through both. He carries her silence like a teaching. It reminds him that power is not the ability to dominate emotion, but the willingness to feel it without distortion. It reminds him that connection without awareness becomes dependency, and that detachment without empathy becomes avoidance. The balance lies in presence, anchored, alert, undefended. There is no triumph here, only equilibrium. No conclusion, only clarity. He no longer asks what she feels or why she withdrew. He no longer defines his worth through what another mirrors back. The mirror now lives within. She too has changed. The once untouchable woman no longer guards her silence as armor. It has become a language. Through it she speaks boundaries without bitterness, discernment without pride. Her sovereignty no longer isolates her. It frees her to meet others from truth, not fear. Together, even in separation, they complete the archetype, the integration of masculine consciousness and feminine depth, not as lovers bound by desire, but as symbols of inner union manifesting through awareness. He no longer blames her. He meets the woman inside himself. She doesn't need closure. She found clarity. When awareness arrived, the story no longer had power, only meaning.